Hi everyone, I'm Shelley from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Just when you thought that you had heard enough from Harvard, you hear some more from them. This time it's a Harvard homeschool expert who says he's not convinced schools should ever have closed. First of all, I find it funny that someone can be considered a homeschool expert when it's not exactly something that you can major in school. And it's also something that this particular person, James Dwyer, has never even done. So, homeschool expert, I would say he is not. But I digress and let's move on. Critics of homeschooling say they're even more concerned now about child abuse since at least 55 million U.S. children are learning at home. Well, first of all, let's point out by saying that the 55 million children who are learning at home are not homeschooling. They are doing school at home. They are still either public or private school students. They are not following homeschooling laws, thus they are not legally homeschoolers. But the Harvard elitist, James Dwyer, who this article is about, and Elizabeth Bartholet, who is also mentioned in this article, they are both lumping them together because I believe that they are going to be using this to outlaw homeschooling or to at least get some really tight restrictions on homeschooling. And you might be wondering why they're worried about this. Well, here's why I believe that they are worried about this. A national poll says 40% of families are more likely to homeschool after lockdowns end. That is why. James Dwyer and Elizabeth Bartholet are globalists, and they have an agenda that they want pushed on the populace. And the best way to do that is through the public education system. So they're kind of like a wounded animal right now. You know, they get vicious when they are hurting. And I believe that they're scrambling because they see what the polls are saying. And we don't know how accurate they are, but I believe that that is why we have this sudden huge push against homeschooling, which seems to be funny because it's coming at a time that almost all kids in the U.S. right now are learning at home. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. So anyway, let's go on. Across the U.S., at least 55 million U.S. students are learning at home since schools closed to stem the spread of the coronavirus. Even prior to the pandemic, 2 Harvard Law School professors expressed their concerns about homeschooling due to the risks for child abuse and low-quality education. More on that later. Calls to child abuse hotlines have declined dramatically since schools closed, demonstrating that there are fewer people assessing risks among children. Now, I will address this right now just because the only thing that I have to say about this is that I don't really have statistics about this. But I am wondering, of the calls to child abuse hotlines that are made by teachers, I assume they're talking about teachers, how many of them actually culminate in any charges? Because I know that I myself, when I had to help out at the VBS at our church, I had to do the online classes and everything to become a mandated reporter. And they tell you to report things like if children's clothes don't fit properly, or if their hair is, getting shaggy or hasn't been cut. So I'm just wondering how much of this actually culminates in anything, or if these are just calls but nothing really comes out of them. Now, I'm certainly not going to say that abuse isn't happening and that it's not going to happen even more now because of everything that's going on, but I do wonder about that. But anyway, let's just move on down here. After much deliberation, most schools across the U.S. made the tough decision in March to close their doors and move to a remote learning platform to help stem the spread of the coronavirus. Despite the overwhelming consensus to shut down, James Dwyer, a visiting professor at Harvard Law School who co-authored a book on the history of homeschooling and its shortcomings, doesn't think that was the right choice, since it could inevitably lead to children falling behind academically and potentially enduring abuse from adults in the home. First of all, if you don't know who James Dwyer is, James Dwyer actually said this: the reason parent-child relationships exist is because the state confers legal parenthood. So yes, this Harvard law professor believes that the only reason that the parent-child relationship exists is because the state gives us the say-so. They give us the okay. He believes that, in essence, the children belong to the state, which is deeply concerning. And it kind of gives you an insight into why he dislikes homeschooling so much. All of the links that I'm going to, that I have up here in the tabs right now, I will leave them in the description box below in case you want to look into them further. You can watch this whole video. He says way more than just this, but this gives you the gist of his feelings about parenting and thus homeschooling. Homeschooling can foster an environment for abuse. A 2014 study found that 47% of school-age victims had been homeschooled and 29% had never been enrolled in school. So when I originally read this article, I clicked on this right here because I wanted to read this 2014 study. What actually happened, though, when I clicked on it was that it took me to a website that was unsecure, and it was warning me that people were possibly trying to steal my information there. So I got off of it as quickly as I could. I do know that someone else did actually get to read this study, and what they said was that the study was it was like 28 kids that they studied, and that the person who actually conducted the study was reprimanded because they had been pushing for the results to show a higher rate of homeschooled children being abused. So the study in it that they are citing right here, it's not trustworthy. I, however, do have a study right here by the National Home Education Research Institute, and it's I'm not going to read the whole thing because we would be here forever. However, I do want to just scroll down to this part right here to show you. Now, first of all, I didn't mention this, but this study here is from 2018, and the one they were using was from 2014. But what it says is that the analysis revealed that the expected number of fatalities among legally homeschooled students was 55, while the actual number was lower at 32. So they concluded the following: legally homeschooled students are 40% less likely to die by child abuse or neglect than the average student nationally. That's right, students who are legally homeschooled, students whose parents chose to homeschool them, who were not kind of thrown into it because the schools shut down, but parents who made this decision to homeschool their children are less likely to be abusive. So again, I'll leave this link. You can read this whole thing, but that shoots down their assertion that homeschool students are at risk for abuse because, yeah, unfortunately, it's going to happen in every subset of education. But the fact is that parents who have chosen to homeschool do it at a much lower rate. I also want to just show you here, sexual abuse by teachers is on the rise. And what it says here is that 10% of students in school are going to experience some level of sexual abuse by a teacher. So this doesn't even include all of the other sorts of abuses that are going on in the schools nowadays. So this just goes to show that not only are students who are not homeschooled more liable to, or are more prone to being abused, but it also happens in school, which is really sad. It also showed here, I just wanted to go back where it says that it could inevitably lead to children falling behind academically. Now, again, if you're talking about actual homeschooling, not school at home, but actual homeschooling, it tells you right here, academic performance. Here we have another study. What I like about the National Home Education Research Institute is that they do give you the citations for their studies. The home educated typically score 15 to 30 percentile points above public school students on standardized academic achievement tests. Now, I'm not one that's big on standardized achievement tests. I know that they really aren't a good measure of learning. But those who are against homeschooling and who are constantly criticizing it, they typically do tend to look towards these tests. So yes, I'm going to use these statistics here. The public school average is the 50th percentile. Scores range from 1 to 99. A 2015 study found Black homeschool students to be scoring 23 to 42 percentile points above Black public school students. Homeschool students score above average on achievement tests regardless of their parents' level of formal education or their family's household income. Keep that in mind, regardless of their parents' level of formal education. Whether homeschool parents were ever certified teacher is not related to their children's academic achievement. Degree of state control and regulation of homeschooling is not related to academic achievement. They typically score above average on the SAT and ACT, and they are increasingly being actively recruited by colleges, which, as you know, I remember in 2015, Business Insider did an article. Harvard was recruiting homeschoolers. But then again, this is just these two professors right now who are really attacking it relentlessly. But let's just move on. This is where James Dwyer goes on just to talk about how he doesn't think that schools should have closed because children are less likely to get coronavirus. Dwyer pushes for background checks on all members of a household to help protect children from abuse. And I will say that while there might not be background checks in the states, but you do have to, at least in Pennsylvania, you have to certify on the affidavit that you do not have anyone in your household who was guilty or who was convicted of that. He also calls for the parents who are homeschooling to have a basic education themselves and for more frequent evaluations of a student's academic progress. Again, there is no reason to worry about this. For the parents who are homeschooling to have a basic education, because guess what? What did that other study say? Homeschool students typically outperform their peers regardless of their parents' level of education. This is his elitism coming out. Okay. And here it talks about the child abuse hotlines again. And I do have that question right now. And now it's going to bring Elizabeth Bartholet in. And I did a video on her also. I'll leave that in the description box, but it's going to move to her now, his colleague. And actually, Elizabeth Bartholet and James Dwyer, they were the ones who were going to have that Harvard homeschooling summit. I call it the anti-homeschooling summit. So you need to watch out for them. And I just wanted to show you, since I did talk about her before, I just wanted to point this out right here. Her biggest complaint about homeschooling, it seems, is that many parents choose to homeschool to shield their children from secular education. In addition to abuse and inadequate teaching, which again is not what the studies show, Bartholet is concerned about some of the motivations of parents who choose to homeschool. Well, let me just show you something. John Dewey, who is considered, I believe, the father of modern schooling, he signed the Humanist Manifesto. You can find that anywhere. This is no secret that John Dewey signed the Humanist Manifesto. We also have here that Charles F. Potter, who wrote Humanism, A New Religion, said, education is thus a most powerful ally of humanism, and every public school is a school of humanism. What can the theistic Sunday school, meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children, do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teachings? So now what we're going to do, so we already see that, yeah, they're admitting that humanism is being taught in the schools, and what do we have here? Federal court decides secular humanism is a religion. That's right. Secular humanism is a religion. It is being taught in the schools. They don't hide the fact that it's being taught in the schools, but they do hide the fact that, yes, it is considered to be a religion. So the separation of church and state in reality is not happening in the public school system. So while people like Elizabeth Bartholet and likely James Dwyer don't like that conservative Christians are raising their children to have their biblical point of views, Bartholet and Dwyer have no problem with pushing the secular humanism narrative, which again is a religion, onto the children. And why? Because it is what is behind, it is what drives their agenda, the globalist agenda. That is what they're concerned about. They know that if too many children are pulled out of schools and actually start homeschooling, not just school at home, but actually start homeschooling, we are going to have a free-thinking populace, something that we don't have right now. But the more and more students that are pulled out of the school system, you can bet that it's going to happen, and it's something that they don't ever want to see. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram because YouTube disables my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.